Thank you. What I wanted to do is to give you a perspective from a city point of view on Copenhagen. From cities, Copenhagen was actually a coming of age, a recognition that there is a new global economic order in terms of China and India as economic powers, but also the fact that as Western European society, we've tended to offshore our carbon emissions to China and India and not taking full responsibility for that. But the other key aspect of Copenhagen was that cities came together. There was one of the key side meetings in alongside the COP15 process, where the mayors and leaders of over 90 cities across the world in all the continents came to discuss climate change and what cities could do. Birmingham was one of those cities, and those cities represented over 750 million people in the planet. So the cities felt, the mayors and the leaders, that by taking action themselves, and the theme of the Mayor's Summit on climate change was Cities Act, and it was about demonstrating that cities can make a difference for the future. And it's that dealing with legacy, the legacy of carbon dependency, which cities have grown up with. And certainly in the UK and in a lot of European cities, the cities have grown on the back of cheap carbon-based energy. And the challenge is to how to adapt and change the existing energy infrastructure and the way our society lives so that we move towards that low carbon transition. So cities have a role to play in terms of creating the conditions for transition. We heard Julia earlier talk about the Committee on Climate Change and the importance of the Climate Change Act. The other part of that agenda is from the bottom-up level for cities to take more control of the agenda of the use of non-renewable resources. And that was one of the aspects that came out of Copenhagen for cities, which was how do cities consume resources, energy, water, and non-renewable materials? But also how can cities generate their own resources from the land and property that they own, manage, and are within their boundaries? I'll just give you an example from a Birmingham perspective. We as cities, and indeed as societies, we don't tend to think of just how much energy it takes to live the way that we do. The energy that we need to heat, to power, to cool, to light, to move around in our cities. And the analysis we've done for Birmingham shows that the amount of gas and electricity and transport fuel that we need just to live, to work, to play, to exist comes to over nearly 2.5 billion pounds each year. That's a huge energy bill, but it's also a huge amount of consumption of non-renewable resources. So the challenge with cities is how to begin to adapt the existing legacy infrastructures, how to make cities more energy efficient, to put in place new, smarter energy systems. From a Birmingham point of view, we have now got an agreed political target of reducing our city's carbon emissions by 60% by 2026. And we have now set up a new political grouping within the Council, a new Cabinet Committee on Climate Change and Sustainability, which is cross-portfolio. So that it's not just one single Cabinet member leading the agenda, but it's the Cabinet members leading it, working with other partners within the city. Now, the key priorities that cities can set provide opportunities for business. And I'll just run through a few of these. One is building retrofits, particularly on the domestic sector. There are a number of examples of building retrofits in Birmingham which have been quite well recognised, and equally other cities across the country and in Europe have done the same. The challenge is to move them from small scale, 2, 3, 4, 500 dwellings, to being more ambitious, to several thousand. and one of those in Birmingham at the moment is a Green New Deal project, which is working with the Energy Savings Trust, the energy companies, but also working with using jobless funds to create green job opportunities. And this is designed to improve the energy insulation, put in solar thermal and solar PV in up to 6,000 homes over the next 18 months, 2 years. But that's only the beginning, because if we really are going to tackle the domestic retrofitting agenda, we have to deal with the other 450,000 domestic properties in the city. So we need to create new public-private delivery partnerships, working with the energy companies in a completely different way than we've done up till now. And then coming to the energy infrastructure in the city, we've got used to, in effect, a plug-and-play system if we want to create a building to use the energy. We need to look at smart energy planning, understand what that energy bill for the city is in more detail, what the demand is for that heating, lighting, powering, transport that I mentioned, but look at the ways in which we can be much more energy efficient. And that's not just building retrofits, it's putting in the right kind of energy infrastructure in terms of district heating networks, and also looking to capture as much renewable energy from within the city in terms of solar energy, the biomass and the ground and air source. And it's having a more strategic approach to that, not just doing it on an individual project by project basis, but really setting up new public-private delivery arrangements to roll that out. And this third element is about moving to a more sustainable transport agenda, both giving better transport information to encourage people to think of transport not just as having to own a car and drive a car, but to get them to think more like logistics companies in terms of thinking of what is the most appropriate logistical method to get from A to B. And that's going to rely on improving the quality of information using digital technology. But when people then and businesses have to move goods and services, it's what form of fuel that is used, moving towards a more electric vehicle agenda, a low carbon fuel agenda. And that's why with Birmingham, along with a number of other UK cities, are involved in the TSB project, in our case the cabled consortium, and also developing the plugged in places and the joined cities approach. But there's also another key issue here about how do we create those conditions for transition, which is trying to create some new forms of marketing messages, because that's key to creating the marketplace in a different way. I think one of the difficulties with the environmental green agenda has been creating blame on consumers rather than making the green product a must-have, not from a guilt perspective, but actually saying, I like that, it's going to give me some clear economic, personal benefits. And I don't think that message has really got across. And the other part of that is really thinking through the innovation and design aspects of the different products. That message is beginning to get through, but there are some real problems, and with the local authorities, I'm sure many of you have come up across the problems with planning committees and design, particularly when it comes to solar thermal and solar PV products. There needs to be greater innovation on that side. So I'll just conclude by saying that cities have got an enormous role here in working in partnership with business, because cities are going to have to deal with this legacy of a carbon-based infrastructure in terms of buildings, the energy infrastructure and the transport infrastructure. But the lesson from Copenhagen, from that city is representing over 750 million people, was that cities can act. Thank you.